Welcome back. It's been a really long time since I've uploaded a video. So moving forward, I will be uploading about 2 to 3 videos every week. So today we're going to be talking about the integumentary system, but I am going to be focusing on the skin today on this video, and there will be other parts where I would discuss the other parts of the integumentary system. So what does the integumentary system consist of as a whole? It consists of hair, skin, nails, glands, and that includes sweat glands, sebaceous or oil glands. And one of the things that we're going to be noticing are accessory glands like your ceruminous glands, which produce earwax, or mammary glands, which are modified sweat glands. So we're going to be focusing on that, on their glands, which is why I have to take the sections. I have to take this by sections and not just talk about it in one full video. So what you're looking at now is a diagram of the skin, and one of the things that you would notice about the skin is the hair shaft. So this does not mean that, oh, is this a part of the skin on my head? No, you actually have hair all over your body. Most of the hairs kind of blend in with the skin, so they're not as visible as, your eyebrows. They're not this, or the hairs on your head, or where you have hair on the other parts of your body. So the skin, I'm going to kind of, work out from the outer to the inner. The skin is divided into two parts, the epidermis and then the dermis. So the epidermis is the very top layer. We say that's a superficial layer. When you're looking at someone's skin or your skin, what you're looking at is the epidermis layer. So one of the things that you need to know about the epidermis is a type of tissue that you're going to find there, and that's going to be the stratified squamous epithelium. If you haven't seen the histology video, be sure to go over to the histology video I posted and look at the video. I was very detailed, not just talking about the tissues in general, but I was talking about the types of tissues and where you can find them. And stratified epithelium is, we usually find them in areas where there's a lot of abrasion, especially stratified squamous epithelium. So it's no surprise that we see that in the epidermis. All right, so we're gonna still zoom in and see a close-up picture in the next slides. And one of the things when we get to the dermis, one of the things you're going to notice is that the dermis is divided into two layers, the papillary layer and the reticular layer. The papillary layer is going to be the area directly underneath the epidermis. And another thing I want to point out about the epidermis is that you do not have any blood vessels there. It kind of ends, the blood vessels are found in the dermal layer, and this tells us that the epidermis is dead. So this is one of the things I always tell people: no matter how beautiful your skin is, it's still dead skin. It doesn't have any nucleus, it doesn't have any blood vessels. So the papillary layer is going to be responsible for providing nutrients and getting rid of waste of the epidermis. And then we're going to see the reticular layer. But before I move on to the reticular layer, the type of tissue we're going to find in the papillary layer is the areolar or the loose connective tissue. If you remember, again, areolar or loose connective tissue plays a big role in inflammation. We talked about water, going to that area. It just soaks up fluid. And, I'm going to make a video where I'm going to be talking about skin disorders and issues and diseases, where I talk about blisters and burns and so on. So whenever there's going to be a blister, it's going to be in the papillary layer. Another thing you're going to see in the papillary layer are what we call the dermal papillae. These sense finger-like projections in the epidermis, such as your touch receptors. So it's no surprise you kind of see a nerve in there due to the tactile or Meissner's corpuscles. And if this was a thick skin, the dermal papillae will lie on top of the dermal ridges. And what's the point of that? They enhance gripping ability. If you want to like grab something, like hold a cup, your cup of coffee, the dermal ridges allows it not to slip from your fingers. Also, this dermal ridge contributes to the sense of touch, and it gives sweat pores the unique features. So you can see here, I have a diagram of the friction ridges of the fingertip here. These sweat pores opening along the crest of the friction ridge help make fingerprints and make them unique in a way. So I'm back to reticular layer. Someone might see the pinkness and say, oh, this is muscle. No, it's not muscle. It's another type of connective tissue called the dense irregular connective tissue. Again, dense irregular connective tissue. I have the notes in the next slide I'm going to be showing you. And this is important because if it was regular has a certain pattern to it. Irregular that we are finding in the skin does not. We're going to find dense regular connective tissue in places like tendons and ligaments. So we're not going to find it here. All right, so it's not muscle. However, we do have a type of muscle attached to the hair follicle. All right, to the hair follicle. Like I said, the shaft is a part exposed. The follicle is deep inside the skin. So the muscle attached to the hair follicle, we call this the erector pili muscle. This is made up of smooth muscle tissue. And one of the features of smooth muscle tissue is that it is involuntary. Involuntary, you don't have control over it. And this is the one that's responsible for goosebumps. When you have goosebumps or you're cold, your hairs stand up straight. And now you can understand why, because the erector pili muscle is directly attached to the hair follicle. Another thing we're going to see on the hair follicle are going to be this bubbly thing right here that are actually sebaceous or oil glands. All right, sebaceous or oil glands. And what they do is they secrete oil to help moisten, lubricate the hairs on not just, on top of your head, obviously, or other parts of the body, but all over your body. Obviously, it's not enough. That's why we put lotion on and so on, right? So, and this also explains if you don't wash your hair for a couple of days, it gets oily. You didn't put any product in your hair, it's going to get oily because the hair follicles are literally attached to the oil glands. And one of the things we're also going to see are going to be this yellow thing right here, which are nerves, nerve endings attached to the hair follicle. Let's say you pluck a hair, it's a bit painful. You feel that tinge or twinge, and that's because the nerves are attached to the hair follicle. So in the dermis, we're going to see also at the very base of the hair follicles, we're going to see capillaries there also. And we're also going to see other parts, something that kind of looks like fingerprint here. It's not a fingerprint. We call this the lamellar corpuscle. This plays a role in touch receptors. We're going to see that there. So another thing we're going to see are the sweat glands. They have the spiral shaped structure, and they have an opening on the outside, leading to the outside in the epidermis. These are sweat glands, and the label here says eccrine sweat glands. This is important because we have another type of sweat glands, which I'm going to discuss when we get to glands. So those are the main ones you have to know about the dermis. And now let's move on to the subcutaneous tissue, also known as the hypodermis. So, if you have old textbooks, it used to be considered part of the skin, but nowadays we don't consider it part of the skin. So the term hypodermis, some books might not even use it because it's still indicating that it's part of the skin, but it's supposed to be underneath the dermis. Hypo means lower or beneath, and dermis, the skin. Right? So subcutaneous tissue. In the subcutaneous tissue, we're going to see obviously, some blood vessels, but most importantly, we're going to see this yellow bubbles, which are basically fat. Adipose cells, adipose tissue, again, which is part of the connective tissue. If you remember, adipose tissue, right? We're going to see that in subcutaneous tissue. A little clinical vignette to tie that into it. Let's say someone had to get a subcutaneous injection. This is where it's going to go. All right, this is where it's going to go, and this is usually because that medication works really well with fat, with adipose tissue. So let's move on to the next slide. Structure of the skin, just a quick summary. Two regions, the epidermis. I mentioned that it has, it's a superficial region, consists of stratified squamous epithelium. It's avascular. What does that mean? It does not have blood vessels. All right, so that's very unique to a unique feature of the epidermis. And then the second layer is the dermis, which we can say is the actual skin. When you look at someone's actual skin, consists of loose or areolar connective tissue. In the papillary layer, the reticular layer, we have the dense irregular connective tissue, and we can see has a lot of blood supply there, so very vascularized and very innervated. We use the word innervated when we are seeing a lot of nerves in that area. I mentioned also hypodermis or subcutaneous, not part of the skin. This consists of adipose tissue. There's a reason why we have, fat underneath our skin. It absorbs shock and for insulation. And also this part helps anchor your skin to underlying structures like your muscles. All right. So the epidermis. All right, so let's take a look at some cells that we're going to find in the epidermis. Keratinocytes. Keratinocytes, you're thinking keratin. Yes, you're right. This is the main cell of the epidermis. It produces keratin. And millions slough off every day. Millions of this keratinocytes slough off every day. Melanocytes, we're going to find melanocytes there. And melanocytes, they produce melanin. They're packaged into melanosomes, which are, where they're going to be found. And the job of melanocytes is to protect the nucleus from UV damage. Everybody has melanin. It just really depends on the color of the melanin. I'm going to be talking about, when I talk about melanoma, I'll talk a little bit about melanin. It ranges from, yellow, brown, red, and this also will account for our hair, not just, our skin. And people that don't have melanin or they lose melanin, we say they're albino, they have albinism, or they have vitiligo, where there's an autoimmunity that's attacking their melanocytes. All right, so vitiligo is basically an attack on melanin. So everybody has melanin. People that don't have melanin, the Caucasian race, they're going to be, they're going to have like a silvery white hair, including their eyelashes. And as you age, the gray hair is due to lack of melanin also. So Langerhans cells is the other one. This is part of the immune system. They kind of like help clean up any debris, any pathogen that might be on your skin. And then the next one would be tactile or Merkel cells. These are sensory receptors that sense touch. There are 4 to 5 layers of the epidermis. All right. So 4 if it's in normal skin, 5 layers if it's in thick skin. And we're going to start from the bottom up. So from the dermis, the part of the layer touching the dermis, the actual skin, and then we're going to work our way outside. So the layer attached to the dermis is going to be the stratum basale, or the basal layer. This is the bottom layer. And here we're going to find that it's actively mitotic, meaning that there's a lot of cell division going on here. It also contains a lot of stem cells. And we're going to find about 10 to 25% of melanocytes here in this layer, in the stratum basale. The next layer is going to be the stratum spinosum. This contains prekeratin filaments attached to desmosomes. And, you know, if you remember when I talked about the desmosomes under cell, how one cell is, connected to another cell. What desmosomes do is that they allow cells to resist tension and pulling, which makes sense. It's in the skin, you're stretching, whether for exercise or, for anything, and your skin don't get torn like paper. And this is due to desmosomes. The next layer is going to be the stratum granulosum. The stratum granulosum is the granular layer. I'm going to be showing you what these layers look like in the next slide. But I just wanted to quickly go over the notes, and so that when we're looking at the diagram, we'll have an idea of what we're looking at. So in the stratum granulosum, what we're going to find here are flat cells, and the nuclei and organelles that start to disintegrate or die. So we would consider this layer, anything above this layer is dead. All right, anything above the stratum granulosum is now dead. Another unique feature that we're going to find here is keratinization. I mentioned keratinocytes in the previous slide. And what's keratin? Keratin is a water-resistant glycolipid that slows water loss. And so that's where that's going to happen. Stratum lucidum is known as the clear layer. We only find this in parts of your body that is clearer than the other, your other bodies, part of the body. And so it's no surprise we're going to see this in thick skin. And where do we find thick skin? In the palms and soles of your feet. It's a thin, translucent rows of clear, flat keratinocytes. And the very last layer is going to be the stratum corneum, the very top layer, the one that you can touch, the one that you can see. In this stratum corneum, we're going to find 20 to 30 rows of flat, anucleated, meaning that it doesn't have any nucleus. Remember, the nucleus disintegrated, died when it was still in the stratum granulosum. But even though we have anucleated, keratinized dead cells, they are still effective. The cells will still protect deeper cells from the environment. They're still going to prevent water loss. They're still going to protect from abrasion and penetration. And this stratum corneum will act as a barrier against any biological, chemical, and physical assaults. So here is a diagram or a breakdown of the layers I just talked about. All right. And we can see, the dermis inferior to that. So I don't know if you can see this on my red cursor right here. You can see the stratum basale. The stratum basale here, the very bottom layer, it's darker because of melanocytes, right? And it's also going to have tactile cells, and these tactile cells have a sensory nerve endings, which is going to protrude from it into the dermis. And melanin granule, like I said, the darkness surround the dermis, and anything superior to this will be considered a dendritic cell. I'll get to that in a second. So this is going to be a sensory neuron here. You can see the tactile disc at the end of that sensory neuron. Excuse me. So within the melanin granules are going to be small specks that we are going to see as keratinocytes. All right, you can see that here, the keratinocytes, here. It's kind of hard to see, but those specks are the keratinocytes. And And so after the stratum basale, we're going to see the stratum spinosum. You know, in the stratum spinosum, we can still see, you know, the nuclei, right? We can still see the nuclei. And then when we get to the stratum granulosum, we start seeing, you know, the shape also of the cells are now different. They're more prickly. They're starting to resemble the ones above it, and we start seeing that the nuclei starts to get smaller. We start seeing that, you know, the granules a little bit more, which means the nuclei are dying, the organelles are dying. And, you know, the stratum lucidum is going to be this layer that's white. And here on the second diagram, you can see very faint whiteness going on here. And we then see the stratum corneum. The stratum corneum is supposed to be, you know, the thickest layer, even though, you know, the diagram is kind of showing the stratum spinosum here, but the thickest layer would be the stratum corneum, which consists of about 20 to 30 layers of dead cells. 20 to 30 layers of dead cells. So one of the things that we're also going to see about the stratum basale is, you know, a cell at the very bottom is going to take about, you know, 25 to 45 days before it becomes or reaches the very top of the stratum corneum. So that's very important. So on to the dermis. Oh, before I go to the next slide, I want to just talk about the Langerhans cells I talked about, which play a role in the immune system. They're there to clean that area up. If there's any pathogens or anything that can cause disease in your skin, their job is to take care of that. So on to the dermis. The dermis is a strong, flexible connective tissue made up of the two connective tissue listed here. I mentioned the areolar connective tissue in the papillary layer, the dense irregular connective tissue in the reticular layer. But we're also going to see other types of cells there, like fibroblasts and macrophages, which, you know, help clean that area up. And occasionally we might see some mast cells, some white blood cells. White blood cells they help with our immune system, help fight infection. And the picture I showed you earlier, the diagram, it contains a lot of nerves, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels. We're going to be talking about lymphatic vessels in the future. Has hair follicles, oil glands, and sweat glands, which, you know, I talked about. So here's just a summary of, you know, the dermis, but one of the things I wanted to show you is the thickness of the epidermis, and we can see this, you know, where we actually start seeing the very tip of the dermis, where we're going to find the basal layer, and you know, and then we see the dermis. Again, you can see the dermal papillae, which I mentioned earlier, and the reticular layer. Reticular layer makes up about 80% of the dermal thickness and has what we call cutaneous plexus. Another word that you're going to be seeing as we move on, cutaneous usually refers to skin, you know, like that's why we have the subcutaneous layer. And plexus, we use plexus to really describe a cluster of blood vessels or a cluster of nerves. So that's going to be it for the skin. I'm going to be posting a video on the other parts of the integumentary system. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.